danger.
As for outings, of course I kept in the open most of the time until the hellish chill of autumn finally began to shut down. Even after that, I managed to take occasional trips to the woods and fields throughout October and just over the line into November. The unique feature of my autumnal explorations was that I succeeded in discovering several splendid rural regions within a 3-mile radius of here which I had never seen before. One is a wooded hill, Newtoconkanut, on the western rim of the town, much south of Friend Mariano, whence a series of marvellous views of the outspread city and adjacent countryside may be obtained. I had often ascended it before, but the exquisitely mystical Sylvian scenery beyond the crest, curious mounds, hummocked pastures and hushed hidden valleys was wholly new to me. On October 28th, I explored this region still further, including the country west of Newtoconkanut and the western slopes of that eminence itself. At certain stages of this ramble, I penetrated a terrain which took me half a mile from any spot I had ever trod before in the course of a long life. I followed a road which branches north and west from the Plainfield Pike, ascending a low rise which skirts Newtoconkanut's western foot and which commands an utterly idyllic vista of rolling meadows, ancient stone walls, hoary groves, and distant cottage roofs to the west and south. Only 2 or 3 miles from the city's heart, and yet in the primal rural New England of the first colonists. Just before sunset, I ascended the hill by a precipitous cart path bordering an ancient wood, and from the dizzy crest obtained an almost stupefying prospect of unfolding leagues of farmsteads and champaigns, gleaming rivulets and far-off forests, a mystical orange sky with a great solar disk sinking redly amidst bars of stratus clouds. Entering the wood, I saw the actual sunset through the trees, and then turned east across the hill to that more familiar cityward slope which I have always known. Never before had I realized the great extent of Newtoconkanut's surface. It really is a miniature plateau or tableland, with valleys, ridges, and summits of its own, rather than a simple hill. From some of its hidden interior meadows, remote from every sign of nearby inhuman life, I secured truly marvellous glimpses of the remote urban skyline, a dream of enchanted pinnacles and domes half floating in the air, and with an obscure aura of mystery around them. The upper windows of some of the taller towers held the fire of the sun after I'd lost it, affording a spectacle of cryptic and curious glamour. Then I saw the great yellow disk of the hunter's moon 2 days before fall, floating above the belfries and minarets, while in the orange glowing west, Venus and Jupiter commenced to twinkle. My route across the plateau was varied, sometimes through the interior, but now and then getting towards the wooded edge, where dark valleys sloped down to the plain below, and huge balanced boulders on rocky heights imparted a spectral druidic effect as they stand out against the twilight. I did not begin to cover the full extent of the plateau, and can see that I have field for several voyages of discovery when warm days return. Finally, I came to more familiar ground, where the grassy ridge of an old buried aqueduct gives the illusion of one of those vestigial Roman roads in Macken's Carmaean country, and stood once more on the well-known eastward crest which I have gazed at since infancy. The outspread city was rapidly lighting up, and lay like a constellation in the deepening dusk. The moon poured down increasing floods of pale gold, and the glow of Venus and Jupiter in the fading west grew intense. Then down the steep hillside to the car line, too cold for enjoyable walking without scenery to compensate for shivers, and back to the prosaic haunts of man.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Innsmouth once more. Innsmouth Library, in fact, for episode 92 of the Innsmouth Book Club. The voice you just heard was our very own Tim Mendes reading something very interesting. That was Lovecraft's last known piece of correspondence, and I believe it was actually unfinished before he died. I am one of your guides, Rob Poynton,
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, indeed, it was. It was basically left unfinished because he tragically passed away. It was a letter to James F. Morton, who we'll get into a little bit about him in a bit. He's an interesting chap, I've discovered. But yeah, the reason we're doing that is because today's story is one of August Dereleth's posthumous collaborations, The Lamp of Alhazred, which actually contains excerpts of that letter.
And I'm sure we don't need to introduce August Dereleth to our listeners, but it's a name that still seems to excite some controversy and a range of opinions, isn't it?
It does. It's interesting. We did actually do an episode on August Dereleth a couple of years back now, when we looked into that at the time, didn't we?
Yeah.
But yeah, he does. I think some of it is very unfair as well. But I think a lot of people dismiss his work without actually reading it a lot of the time.
Totally.
Yeah.
And aside from that, I mean, he was the founder of Arkham House. And I think, to put it in simple terms, if there was no Dereleth, none of us would be reading Lovecraft today.
Exactly.
Or Ramsey Campbell and various other authors.
Ryan Lumley.
Yeah. And I think actually this is an example of Dereleth's better writings, because there's some very nice passages in this. And I think more than that, this is a very deeply personal piece, it seems to me, because I think this is effectively Dereleth saying goodbye to his friend.
It is, yeah. That's exactly what I took of it. And actually, a contemporary review of the collection that he put out, The Survivor, which we'll get to in due course, actually commented on that, basically saying it is in memoriam, isn't it? It's a tribute to Mr. Lovecraft.
Yeah, and it's a way of framing Lovecraft's ending, which, as I'm sure we all know, was deeply unpleasant, into something a little more uplifting or poignant still and sad. But it reminded me a bit of that, when you have kids and the pet dog or cat, it's that time, and you say to the kids, he's gone to the farm. Rover's gone to the farm and he's with all his friends.
Yes.
It has a little bit of that feel about it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It reminded me of that. I can't remember which story it was, but it was one of the early Clark Ashton Smith ones that we covered on Strange Shadows. And it was that artist, the poet/journalist who went missing. And then it told us his adventure.
Yeah.
But that was basically him, and it was basically Ambrose Bierce, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was done in a very similar way. It explained them no longer being around, but in terms of their own sort of fiction.
Yeah, a very sort of poetic ending in that sense, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So when did Dereleth write this, and what's the publication history?
It was written and first published in October 1957 in an issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, which has been going since the late 40s and is still going to this day.
Wow. And
it's probably the big magazine stateside. It's where people like Stephen King first published The Dark Tower, and Ill Met in Lankmare and things like that first got published. So it's a big deal. Basically, it's one of those. It's one of the bigger magazines that came out post pulp, that 50s revival kind of thing, right? And yeah, the Lamp of Alhazred is probably one of the best known of Dereleth's posthumous collaborations, which, as we've discussed before, a lot of them were ideas out of Lovecraft's commonplace book that Dereleth then went on to write stories about.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it was almost like taking prompts. And I think that's where quite a lot of the criticism comes from, because of the use of the posthumous collaboration thing. But, but this one is one of the ones that it actually includes the most of Lovecraft's work in it.
Right.
You do actually have Lovecraft's writing in this story. So in that case, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's probably best known for its inclusion in, as I mentioned, The Survivor, which was an Arkham House collection. And then it was reprinted in, I believe, in the paperback, The Shuttered Room.
Yes, that's what I have here, actually, the Panther Horror, The Shuttered Room.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and this is from 1974, this version. And someone has very kindly written in biro 45 pence on the inside
Oh,
cover.
lovely. That's brilliant. Yeah, the version I'm going off is out of the Watchers Out of Time, which was the complete collection of the posthumous collaborations, apart from The Lurker at the Threshold, which obviously was a standalone novella.
Yeah.
This was original. The copyright on this was 1974 from Del Rey, so it might be the exact same book, just with a different title. You know how it works with because it depends whether it's the States publication or the British publication, right?
Yes.
Half the time, depending on the name of things. It's one of those weird things. Yeah, as I mentioned, that this contains a lot of Lovecraft's writing, which it contains big chunks of that letter that I read at the start. You'll see how they're woven in. They're woven in really quite nicely, I think. But it came from a letter he dated it March 1937. And like I say, it was unfinished. And it was addressed to James F. Morton, who was a Calum Club member, an anarchist writer, and political activist. He's an interesting chap, and I've got a little bit about him here because I find this really interesting because you couldn't, like him and Lovecraft, you couldn't get any more different people.
Polar opposites, politically speaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As early as 1903, Morton was visibly against racism in his writing for the anarchist Discontent, and he campaigned actively for civil rights, challenging productions like The Klansman. And in 1906, published The Curse of Race Prejudice.
Wow.
Yeah. In addition to all that, some of his other topics that he basically wrote about and campaigned for were racism against redheads, the recent anti-Semitism in Russia, conventionality in religion and politics, tyranny in the postal system, workers' rights and social reform, baseball games on Sundays, and contraception. So there you go. He's an interesting chap.
I think people do forget these days. I don't want to go too much into the political side of things, but we know how political discourse goes at the moment, particularly on social media.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And people, I think, have forgotten a little bit in some cases just how long and hard the struggle was to obtain even things like basic contraception.
Yeah.
Let alone all those other things as well. So it's very interesting to look back in the history of that. And just as a little aside, I have a very good book called The English Rebels, which goes all the way back to Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And charts the kind of course of the struggle for rights over the centuries. Very interesting reading, and there was very little in there that I was ever taught at school.
No, it's true, isn't it? Yeah. Morton was also a big advocate for women's suffrage and feminism in general. So this guy was really sort of way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
By a lot of accounts, this Morton chap. And then you've got Lovecraft, who isn't at all.
An interesting dynamic, because I presume if he was Calum Club, they would have known each other well.
Oh yeah, they were by all accounts really quite close friends.
Yeah,
but I think that's something else that I think a lot of people forget, that people used to be able to have discussions and friendships across political lines, whereas when we're seeing less and less of that now, it's almost like faction warfare, isn't it? It's weird.
Yeah, it's become very tribalized, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, quite often in weird fiction, particularly with people like Smith and Lovecraft, we often say that the central character, if there is even a central character, is usually a thinly disguised version of the author themselves.
Yep.
There's very little disguise in this. The central character, Ward Phillips, is Lovecraft, as we shall see as we go through.
Yeah, there's so much. It's like as soon as you read the beginning bit, which I'm sure you're about to do, you just go, "That's HPL, isn't it?"
Indeed, yes. So yeah, the very first lines. It was 7 years after his grandfather Whipple's disappearance that Ward Phillips received the lamp. This, like the house on Angel Street where Phillips lived, had belonged to his grandfather. Phillips had had the living of the house ever since his grandfather's disappearance, but the lamp had been in the keeping of the old man's lawyer, until the elapsing of the required 7 years for the presumption of death. So, Grandfather Whipple.
Indeed.
And of course, Lovecraft's maternal grandfather was named Whipple Van Buren Phillips. So a very direct reference there. And Angel Street, of course, is where Lovecraft was born.
Yep.
Born at number 454. And later on, he moved to 598 Angel Street. So again, another very direct reference.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's also the age of Ward Phillips here. He's listed as being 46, I think, or something like that, which is the age Lovecraft was when he died. So
yes, and in terms of character, the way he writes him is as we'll discuss. There's one particular comment I've got from one of Lovecraft's letters that elaborates on this. A person who feels a little bit out of time.
Oh yes, yeah,
quite a non-sociable in some ways. Doesn't really engage with the modern world as such. And is plagued with ill health.
Yeah. Ward Phillips was also used by Lovecraft himself, that name, in the Gates of the Silver Key.
Ah.
It was just a passing reference. He was a Providence mystic who enjoyed a long correspondence with Randolph Carter, and he was described as lean, grey, long-nosed, clean-shaven, and stoop-shouldered. So there's a bit of the autobiographical there, right?
He didn't have a very good self-image, did he, HPL?
No, he didn't. The Reverend Ward Phillips also turns up in Lovecraft's The Lurker at the Threshold.
Ah, of course, of course. Yes, and just to seal the deal, so to speak, Phillips had become a writer for the pulp magazines and had eked out a spare living by undertaking, in addition, the revision of countless almost hopeless manuscripts of prose and verse by writers far more amateur than he. So again, another piece of Lovecraft's life.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we get this next bit here as well. His sedentary life had weakened his resistance to disease. He was tall, thin, wore glasses, and was prey to colds. And once, much to his embarrassment, he came down with the measles. Again, that's something that happened to Lovecraft. and I seem to recall reading letters that he wasn't entirely happy about this fact, was he?
And what we get very much here is Lovecraft's Providence as well, because we get descriptions of these walks around Providence, which I think this is where we get the direct quotes from the letters, right?
Yeah, you see, when he's talking about the Nutakonkanut, the hill, that's where the direct quotes come for the oranges and crimsons of the sunlight and Venus and Jupiter and all that kind of lovely poetic stuff that comes directly out of the Lovecraft letter.
Oh, right, yeah. And this is an actual place in Providence. It's actually in the middle of Providence. It's an 88-acre park with this large hill. Well, I say large. I think it goes up to about 300 foot above sea level. So, of course, from the top of that, you get splendid views across the whole of Providence. And we know that HPL did like to go on his diurnal perambulations.
Indeed. Yeah, I liked that phrase, diurnal excursions. I liked that, yeah.
And then we get a description of the lamp itself. It had once been the property of a certain half-mad Arab known as Abdul Alhazred, and was a product of the fabulous tribe of Ad, one of the four mysterious little-known tribes of Arabia, which were Ad of the south, Thamud of the north, Tazim and Jadis of the centre of the peninsula. It had been found long ago in a hidden city called Irem, the City of Pillars. The Lamp of Alhazred was unusual in its appearance. It was meant for burning oil and seemed to be of gold. It had the shape of a small oblong pot with a handle curved up from one side and a spout for wick and flame on the other. Many curious drawings decorated it, together with letters and pictures arranged into words in a language unfamiliar to Phillips. Now, we have spoken about Alhazred and the Necronomicon before in quite a lot of detail. It was one of our bonus episode number 4. We covered the history of the Necronomicon. So you can refer back to that to get all the the background history, such as it is, on old Abdul and his untimely demise.
Indeed. And obviously that is, it's all sort of directly referencing Lovecraft's story, The Nameless City, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
all this kind of stuff now.
And we do also know as well that Lovecraft did indeed possess an antique lamp, I believe.
Yes, indeed. We found this while we were covering the fungi from Yuggoth in our ongoing Patreon bonus series, when covering the section on the lamp, which I personally speculate was another influence on this. I mean, it's quite obvious to me, but it's not mentioned by anybody else, which I find quite strange. But Lovecraft acknowledged the influence of this entry with a note saying that the entry and the sonnet would have been suggested by an ancient lamp that he owned. I also fell for one of the ancient pottery lamps whose cheapness is due to the limitless quantities lately excavated. A Grecian affair of about 500 BC. It sits before me now, enchanting in its glamour, and has already suggested at least one weird story plot to my inspiration. That was a letter to Lillian D. Clark, dated the 8th of September, 1925.
And indeed, we get a mention of that story plot in the Commonplace book as well. Ancient lamp found in tomb, when filled and used, its light reveals strange world, which is, pretty much what happens here.
Yes. And also happens in the sonnet, the lamp. Yeah. Because people mention the Commonplace book entry and obviously the letter and things like that, but nobody seems to remember. Seems to talk about the lamp, the sonnet from Fungi from Yuggoth. But you've got this bit at the end of it. We struck a match to test the ancient oil. It blazed, great God! But the vast shapes we saw in that mad flash have seared our lives with awe.
Very nice, very nice. And of course, if you want to hear our analysis and run through of the Fungi from Yuggoth sonnet cycle, you can sign up as a patron and that will give you access to the bonus shows. I think we're going to be recording number 4 of those in a week or so's time. And I think, as we said when we started that, we thought we were going to cover 24 sonnets in 1 or 2 episodes. Well, I think we've covered the first 5 or something in 3 episodes. So it's going to run and run now.
It is because we've not even got into like adaptations and things, because all the musical adaptations and people like this. There's a German metal band has done a version of it, for Christ's sake.
So this lamp appears in his life, along with a letter from his grandfather. Old Whipple had written, "It may bring pleasure equally by being lit or by being left dark. It may bring pain on the same terms. It is the source of ecstasy or terror." So, of course, Ward is going to light it.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, of course you would.
It's the don't press the big red button, isn't it? That's exactly what it is.
And we get a little section of verse here. I don't know if you know where this was from or whatever, but I'll read the section. That night, putting aside the candles and kerosene lamp by the light of which he had worked for many years, he lit the lamp of Alhazred. He was mildly astonished at the warmth of its glow, the steadiness of its flame, and the quality of its light. But since he was behind in his work, he did not stop to ponder these things, but bent at once to the task in hand, which was the revision of a lengthy creation in verse, which began in this manner. "Oh, 'twas on a bright and early morn of a year long 'fore I was born, while earth was yet being torn, long before by strife 'twas worn." I don't have any idea where that verse came from. Is that Lovecraft? Is it Dereleth? Is it something else?
I have no idea. I have tried to find out, but I suspect it's Dereleth. I can't find it, but Lovecraft wrote so many damn letters to go through them all and find out.
And we do also know from research we've done from the sonnets how Lovecraft experimented with various verse styles, particularly what he called archaic and old-fashioned forms as well. So it's possibly some fragment from one of those works.
Yeah, it's possibly a fragment from the Commonplace book or something, because a lot of what Dereleth used was out of the Commonplace book. So I would speculate that, but I did try and find out this morning, but I came up with a blank. So if anybody out there does know, feel free to drop us a line, because I'd love to find out.
Yes, please do let us know. And from that, we get this very, well, to us, recognizable description of Lovecraft in terms of his attitude towards his surroundings, to being part of almost the fabric of the history of where he is.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned before several times about Lovecraft tends to write from a geographical perspective, lots of descriptions of gambrel roofs and all the rest of it. It's very much a sense of place and time that he works from. And I just wanted to read this because I'm a glutton for punishment. And we were mentioning earlier, one thing you get, particularly with Lovecraft, these incredibly long sentences.
Oh, yes.
This is all one sentence, but it's very nicely written. And again, this showcases some of Dereleth's talent as a writer, I think, this kind of paragraph or sentence. But however much Phillips was inclined to retreat to a time when the world was younger and less hurried, to the 18th century or even further back, when there was still time for the art of conversation, and when a man might dress with a certain elegance and not be looked at askance by his neighbours, the lack of invention in the lines over which he struggled, and the paucity of ideas, together with his own weariness, soon combined to tire him to such an extent that he found it impossible to continue, and recognising that he could not do justice to these uninspired lines, he pushed away at last and leaned back to rest and breathe.
It's a lovely passage, isn't it? But yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people seem to overlook with Dereleth, because I think he's an easy target in a lot of respects, because we take the mickey out of his shopping lists, right?
Well, the shopping list, yeah.
Where he will just basically reel off hundreds of mythos tomes or deities or whatever. And I personally speculate that that's part of the thing of getting the word count up, because, words are money back in them days, right? If you could squeeze an extra couple of dollars out of it by sticking in the Necronomicon and the Cult de Ghouls, why wouldn't you?
Well, yeah. I think also he's reinforcing that mythos aspect, which he liked to structure a lot more than Lovecraft did himself, as we know. That's another criticism, right?
Yeah.
So I think by doing that sort of constant repetition of these book titles, he was reinforcing the idea that this is all real.
Yes, and I think, but because of that, people tend to go, well, he was crap. His writing wasn't very good. Yeah. But if you it's something that I saw, because somebody had put up something along them lines online not that long ago, and somebody who replied to it was none other than Mr. Ramsey Campbell, who actually said, if you have a doubt about Dereleth's skill as a writer, go and read his non-mythos work or his Sack Prairie stuff, because he's not wrong. Dereleth was a perfectly good writer when he went for it. You know what I mean? So
Phillips is tired. He can't get into it writing his poetry. He doesn't know how to finish it. So he sits back, and that's when he starts to see the effect of having lit the lamp. The familiar walls of books, broken here and there by windows, over which Phillips was in the habit of drawing the curtains tight so that no light from outside invaded his sanctuary, were strangely overlaid, not only with the light of the lamp from Arabia, but also by certain objects and vistas in that light. And we get this sort of series of visions. It's almost like a projection, isn't it? Like a cinema projection. I almost have that old-fashioned flickering camera noise going on in my mind.
Yes. Magic lanterns. That's what I'm seeing. The old magic lantern, the Phantasmagoria shows where they project things through smoke and stuff like that using a magic lantern. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, as sort of Phantasmagoria.
And it starts way back in the prehistoric era, right? We've got the earth, we've got lava, we've got great gouts of steam, fissures and rocks. And of course, we've got the trails of serpentine animals showing plainly in the mud. High overhead flew great beasts that fought and tore. And from an opening in a rock on the edge of the sea, a tremendous animal appendage resembling a tentacle uncoiled sinuously and menacingly into the red, wan sunlight of that day, like a creature from some fantastic fiction, which is a nice little nod.
It is, isn't it?
The big sea himself, perhaps, or something like that.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. Because, I mean, that's obviously what Dereleth was going for here. is like, this is where Lovecraft got his ideas. It all came from the lamp, which I think is a really quite nice tribute to his friend, in a way. But I actually like that bit of just a tentacle coiling in the distance, because that's quite understated, which is something that Dereleth doesn't do that often. He's tend to bang, here's Cthulhu, but to have it lurking in the corner, I think is a nice touch.
It's almost like a little cameo appearance, isn't it?
It is a cameo. It's like a Marvel universe. It's
is that Doctor Strange over there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like you, I like this aspect of what Phillips sees in these visions. He sees what he knows as the nameless city, this lost city in the desert. And then he sees the snowy peaks and he thinks, these must be the mountains of madness, or perhaps Kadath in the cold waste. And basically, I mean, this is where he's getting the inspiration for all these famous stories from.
Yeah, which I think is quite a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, like I say, it's that poetic aspect, isn't it? It's not just a guy slaving over a typewriter and going, "Oh shit, I've spelt Cthulhu wrong again."
Yeah.
It's a much more poetic sort of origin story, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually, this story is actually quite Smithian to me.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because a lot of Smith's stories are about these people who they experience some weird and wonderful stuff by like gazing into a painting or drinking something that they shouldn't have drunk or something, and then getting these visions and then becoming like the start of something. So it is a very poetic story in that respect, I think. Yeah.
And I think we see more of that now, where the next day Phillips goes out for a walk. Now, I don't know how much of this is taken directly from the letter, but again, there's some very nice language here. It's quite a long passage, so I'm just going to read a couple of extracts from it. Just before sunset, he climbed the hill by a precipitous cart path bordering an old wood, and from the dizzy crest obtained an almost stupefying prospect of outspread countryside, gleaming rivulets, far-off forests, and mystical orange sky, with the great solar disk sinking redly amidst bars of stratus clouds. Entering the woods, he saw the actual sunset through the trees and then turned east to cross the hill to a more familiar cityward slope which he had always sought. The upper windows of some of the taller towers held the fire of the sun after he had lost it, affording a spectacle of cryptic and curious glamour. Then he saw the great round disk of the hunter's moon floating about the belfries and minarets, while in the orange glowing west, Venus and Jupiter commenced to twinkle. So it's a very picturesque view.
Now that's verbatim, pretty much. That is verbatim from the letter. The only difference is how it's been paraphrased, because obviously it's no longer being read in the first person. So Dereleth has just adapted it. But all those things like that you mentioned, the gleaming rivulets, the mystical orange sky, the hunter's moon, that's all in there. Yeah.
Nice. And it touches on one of Lovecraft's other great interests, astronomy, as well, of course.
Indeed, yeah.
But despite all that, he is unable to put out of his mind the memory of those visions. So, of course, when he returns to his house, he ate his solitary supper, went early to his study, and lit the lamp once again. So this is the monomania, we could call it, or the addiction now, right? You can't stop. Once you open that book, there's no going back.
This is it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's from now we get more of Lovecraft's fiction being mentioned. He saw a dwelling of great beauty wreathed in vapours on a headland like that near Gloucester, and he called it the strange high house in the mist. He saw an ancient gambrel-roofed town with a dark river flowing through it, a town like to Salem, but more eldritch and uncanny, and he called the town Arkham, and the river Miskatonic. He saw the dark brooding sea-coast town of Innsmouth and Devil Reef beyond it. He saw the watery depths of R'lyeh, where dead Cthulhu lay sleeping. He looked upon the windswept plateau of Leng and the dark islands of the South Seas, the places of dream, the landscapes of other places of outer space, the level being that existed in other time continua and were older than Earth itself.
So it's the whole mythos laid out, isn't it? Pretty much here.
Yeah.
And this sort of spurs him into a frenzy of writing. And this is where all the stories come from, right? In this particular account, he has these visions, this series of visions, and it spurs him to sit down and write, what is it, sort of 30, 40 stories or something
Yep.
over the next, whatever the time is. Well, this is all that night he wrote, and all the next day he slept exhausted. So he's in a sort of fever to get this stuff out. And I like we get a mention of the circle as well. And the following night, once again, he wrote, though he took time to answer letters from his correspondents, to whom he wrote of his dreams, unknowing whether he had seen the visions that passed before his eyes, or whether he had dreamed them, and aware that the worlds of his fiction had been woven inextricably with those which belonged to the lamp. So again, there's that weird fiction, unreliable narrator, because is this the lamp? Is it all just a dream? Is it a combination of the two? There's always that little layer of uncertainty.
Indeed, yeah.
And in fact, after this, he puts the lamp away. He doesn't light it for years, actually. And during this time, his fictions found their way into print, and here we get the shopping list, right?
Here we get it.
The myths of Cthulhu, of Hastur the Unspeakable, of Yuggoth and Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, of Hypnos, the god of sleep, of the great old ones and their messenger, who was Nyarlathotep, all became part of the lore of Philip's innermost being and the shadow world beyond. He brought Arkham into reality and delineated the strange high house in the mist. He wrote of the shadow over Innsmouth and the whisper in darkness, and the fungi from Yuggoth and the horror at Dunwich, and in his prose and verse, the light from the lamp of Alhazred shone brightly, even though Phillips no longer used the lamp. So it had quite an effect on him.
Yeah, so 16 years passed in this fashion, and then one night he came upon the lamp where he had put it behind a row of books on one of the lowermost shelves of his grandfather Whipple's library. He took it out, and at once all the old enchantment and wonder were upon him, and he polished it anew and set it once more on his table. So, yeah, you get the thing that it's like he's had this period of productivity, and it's almost like he can sense the end.
Yeah.
It's sort of that harbinger kind of thing going on, right?
Yeah, well, that becomes very clear, doesn't it? Because at this point, he has become seriously ill, in fact, terminally ill at this point, mortally ill. He knew that his years were numbered.
Yep.
And he wanted to see again the worlds of beauty and terror that lay within the glow of the lamp. So, of course, he lights it again. And I thought this was very sweet. This time, it's as though he goes back to his childhood.
Yes.
Because we know Lovecraft wrote about, didn't he see a faun or something when he was a young boy?
Indeed.
And he had this the whole Greek myth thing and everything.
Yep.
So it harkens back to that. There now came to be a magical presentation of a country intimately known to Ward Phillips, but not to his time, rather of a time gone by, a dear lost time when he had romped through his childhood playing his imaginative games of Greek mythology along the banks of the Seekonk. For there once again were the glades of childhood, there were the familiar coves and inlets where he had spent his tender years, there was once more the bower he had built in homage to great Pan, and all the irresponsibility, the happy freedoms of that childhood lay upon those walls, for the lamp now gave back his own memory. That's very nice, isn't it?
Indeed. Yeah, I think it's a very touching tribute to his friend, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
It's strange because not a lot of people seem to talk about this story in that kind of respect, because people talk about other things that have like, oh, this was dedicated to Lovecraft kind of thing. But I think this is one of the sort of nicest, if you know what I mean.
It feels deeply personal in the sense of not only personal in terms of Lovecraft and his life and what he did, but Dereleth viewing all this with a sort of fondness and respect as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And almost a wish that, Lovecraft passed in a very unpleasant way. This turns it into something much sweeter, and he just goes. He goes back, as we see in the last sort of paragraph. In effect, Phillips disappears. No one can find him. Well, we knew he was ill. He's probably gone out for a walk and fallen down a hole or something.
Yeah.
But in fact, he's been transported back into this wonderful world of his childhood.
Yes, indeed.
And then we get the final paragraph. The years passed. The old house on Angel Street was torn down. The library was bought up by bookshops, and the contents of the house were sold for junk, including an old-fashioned antique Arabian lamp for which no one in the technological world past Philip's time could devise any use.
I like that because it's one of those weird fiction endings that you could take and write something.
Well, the lamp is in a bric-a-brac shop somewhere, right? In the back streets of Providence. And yeah, you can see a whole new thing going from that, can't you?
Yeah.
But of course, the house, at least one of the houses in Angel Street, was torn down, right? I think possibly both of them even, I'm not too sure.
It was, yeah.
There is a Lovecraft square there now. There is a plaque to Lovecraft and a small memorial square to him, I believe, on Angel Street.
Right, yeah.
Because when we went there must have been about, early 2000s, and there was the plaque at the library, but nothing else at all.
Really?
We were quite disappointed. We found some of the sites, the Fleur de Lis house and, that sort of thing. But I think that's changed a lot now. There are Lovecraft walks and all that sort of thing going on.
Yeah, there is. And there was a statue, but it's not got a permanent residence. So it's now in somebody's garage, apparently. Somebody made a statue to Lovecraft, and it was displayed probably in that square that you're talking about, but it's not got a permanent spot, so it's been moved about a bit.
Wow. Somehow a moving statue seems quite Lovecraftian, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Yeah.
You turn around and it's moved a little bit. Oh, has it?
Like a weeping angel from Doctor Who, but it's Lovecraft looming over you. That's brilliant. I like that.
That's cool. So yeah, I find that quite a touching story and a very nice way for Dereleth to remember his friend, I think, because I think sometimes people forget this as well. They were friends.
Yes.
This wasn't just a business thing like with Farnsworth Wright or Gernsback or those people. That was business, right? Yes. You're sending them a story. The guy pays you or doesn't and whatever. The circle seemed to be quite tight-knit. And even though some of them never physically met, the correspondence is, well, to quote the word, voluminous,
Voluminous, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
So, yeah, and I think one of the things this story reinforces to me is Lovecraft's connection with Providence, as we said, both in that idea of time and place. And I just want to finish today by reading an extract from one of Lovecraft's letters to Clark Ashton Smith. This is from the collection Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill, which is, a treasure trove. It's the correspondence between Smith and Lovecraft, and it ranges from quite serious discussions about various aspects of the sciences through to them making up names of strange places and swapping story ideas. So it really is an excellent read. And this is an extract from a letter dated October the 15th, 1927, 10 Barn Street, Providence, Rhode Island. Dear C.A.S., I was born and reared in a certain kind of old town, with certain kinds of ancient steeples and doorways around me, certain kinds of faces and voices flitting through the scene, a certain kind of house in a certain kind of quiet neighbourhood, containing me, certain articles of furniture, painting, statuary, and bric-a-brac in the rooms through which I walked, certain books on the shelves, and certain staid and conservative New England social and moral and political attitudes floating around in a circumambient conversation. These things I find are all that spell reality in life to me. As soon as I am apart from them, everything becomes spurious and two-dimensional, vague fragments of a dream in which I have no business to be. It may be that the alien milieu is intrinsically richer in aesthetic and intellectual value, but that means nothing to me. My aesthetic and intellectual life are lived in books anyhow, all exclusive of people and material surroundings, and owe nothing to companionship. What I need is simply my own fabric as a matter of cosmic symmetry, be it worse or better than anybody else's fabric. That ethereal sense of identity with my own native and hereditary soil and institutions is the one essential condition of intellectual life, and even of a sense of complete existence and waking reality, which I cannot do without. Like Antaeus of old, my strength depends on repeated contact with the soil of the Mother Earth that bore me.
Nice. That's a lovely little piece, that, isn't it? I like some of the terms in there, my fabric and all that. So, yeah. Yeah. Again, all just reinforcing that as we saw in that piece, and indeed in all of Lovecraft's work, really, that deep rootedness in his
his native surroundings, I suppose we'd call them.
Yeah. Well, isn't his epitaph "I am Providence"?
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I really enjoyed the Lamp of Alhazred as a story, because it does. It's one of those you very rarely think of weird fiction as being comforting, but it is one of the it's an oddly comforting story, isn't it? It's strange.
That's true. Yeah, that is very true, because even though, well, it is a sort of happy ending, isn't it, really, in that it's taken away from not only the day-to-day pain of his existence in one sense, but also in the sense of the illness and the suffering there. He's got a release from that. And back into this time when presumably he was happiest. I mean, we all have that, right? That childhood nostalgia thing.
Oh, yeah.
Every now and again, you get a little glimpse of something, don't you? It might be something you see online, or an advert from 1972 or whatever.
Public service films. They're the ones for me.
Maybe that's not such an applicable thing to people of a certain generation who remember growing up with Children of the Stones and Tarot and the Figure of Death telling you not to go swimming in lakes.
Exactly. That's what I always get it from.
And Hammer horror on late night television.
Yeah, absolutely.
And plastic aurora models that glowed in the dark of Phantom of the Opera. Terrifying.
Yeah. Well, I often get it from smells and things like that, but like the smell of the glue that you used on the Airfix models and that kind of crap, right? It's very evocative.
Yeah.
And that's what you get from this. It's all, because it is all sights and sounds and smells, and it's a very sensory story, which again is something you more associate with Smith than Dereleth. Yeah.
And I suppose that is the childhood state, isn't it? You tend to observe and take in. You don't really analyze so much. When you're a kid, you don't think, oh, there's a cumulonimbus cloud. That's formed when the precipitation raises above a temperature of whatever. You think, Lara, my wife, said to me yesterday, look at that cloud. It looks like Batman.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the sort of conversations we have in our house, but yeah, it is exactly that. There's that childhood wonder.
Yeah.
Being very open and receptive just to the experience rather than analysis, which is, in a way, another tenet of weird fiction.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, specifically the weird fiction of people like Lovecraft and Smith, when it is all these almost abstract. I mean, like say, Fungi from Yuggoth, it is all them abstract images, isn't it? And snapshots of dream and experience and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So yeah, I'm glad we read that. I had read that before, so I've had that book for years, but I never really remembered it. So it was very nice to revisit that and take a look at it through the lens of, I suppose we have a bit more knowledge of Lovecraft now, particularly through his letters. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, I enjoyed that a lot more than when I've read it before, because I now know the backstory to it. And finding the letters, the actual letter that a lot of it was taken from, added something else to it for me.
So yes, we hope you enjoy that, dear listener. If you have any thoughts on that story, please do let us know. If you've been to Providence, please do let us know as well. I'd love to go there again. Well, I think both of us have a bit of an itch to get to the Necronomicon, don't we? Maybe the year after next.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure how we're going to raise funds yet, but we've got a few ideas. Not robbing a bank. We tried that. That didn't work out so well.
No.
But,
I still think we should start a cult, and donations. That would be the way to go, right?
Only if I can wear scarlet robes.
Oh yeah, you can wear whatever coloured robes you want. I want yellow ones.
Okay. Well, we don't want to clash, do we, darling? We don't can't turn up wearing the same robes.
No, exactly. I want yellow and a pallid mask. There you go.
Oh yes, yeah, pallid mask. Yeah, nice. Okay, so thanks very much for joining us today. As you say, do send in your comments, questions, and suggestions. And it's just time to quickly, it's going to be the last plug for the Innsmouth Literary Festival, which is happening in less than 2 weeks' time by the time this episode goes out. So if you haven't already, please do book your ticket. If you're a patron, remember, you get free entry. We've got Charles Stross, we've got John Houlihan, we've got Mike Mason, we've got Paul Fricker, We've got David Hambling. We've got a whole host of people turning up to do book readings, take parts in panels. Oh, we've got traders. We've got 25 trade stands, I think. Everything from Innsmouth cakes. There's going to be a raffle for an Innsmouth cake.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's looking really good, I can tell you that. We've got publishers, we've got booksellers. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
Are we going to have tentacles in jars again this year?
I'm not sure, but I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
I'll see what I can do.
All right. Yeah.
Be there or be non-Euclidean. That's what I'll say.
Indeed. Yeah, and then after the main feast of the day, we've got Innsmouth After Dark as well, where we're going to be treated to a performance of H.P. Lovecraft's Outsider by Matthew Wood from Edwardian Tales. Mr. C.J. Hooper's back doing his urban horror fairy tales, which is all improv. Basically, the audience gives him a Lovecraftian prompt, and he'll go off and he'll come up with a poem on the spot. It's really, really good fun. He did it last year.
Marvellous.
Didn't he do one about me and you at a Deep One wedding or something?
I think there was something like that. I have vague recollections. It got a bit hazy about 10 o'clock.
Yeah, that's it. I was pissed by that point. And then the evening is capped off by a set by Byronic Sex and Exile, which is a gothic rock project from Leeds, and it's a lot of the subject matter is from weird fiction and things like that. And he tends to wave a sword around a lot, which is always good fun.
That's always a sign of a good chap or chapess, waving a sword around. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Marvellous. Well, we do hope to see you there. And of course, if you can't make it, for our patrons, we'll be recording all of the panels. So we will put those out for you in the Junus, of course. So that's it for today. What are we covering next time, sir?
Right, well, next time we're going to be, speaking of swords, we're going to be waving our weapons around, oh matron. We're going to dive into Fritz Leiber's Bazaar of the Bizarre.
Oh, marvellous. Farford and the Grey Mouncer.
Indeed.
I think it's one of the early Lankmar adventures. And I think a lot of people will say, and myself included, this is probably in the top 5 sword and sorcery stories.
Yeah, I can never decide which is my favourite of Leiber's. It's either that or Adept's Gambit. I can never decide which one's my favourite. Yeah.
Yes, that's very good as well. Yeah. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. All right. Thanks very much for joining us today, folks. We'll see you next time. It's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.